go. I
Here
think we
we
are live. Here we
go.
go.
We are here. We
Yes.
are here and we are without fear.
Although I'm not entirely sure I'm ever really here.
No. Yeah, that could get philosophical real fast.
Yeah. I got it.
Oh man, but I'm excited. I really
Yeah.
am. And it's not just because I was drinking Monster Energy drink. But it's not going to hurt.
Is that what you do for your anxiety? Drink Monster Energy drink?
No, I was having the opposite of anxiety this time. It was more like I needed to perk myself up a little bit because I've been reading all day, and so my brain waves are just kind of flat.
I hear you. I hear you. No, I had a
Uh,
crazy day, crazy busy day, but it was like a peaceful. I don't know. It was like fun work stuff, which is really weird.
Yay!
Yeah, I walked out and I was like, I like my job. I live a charmed life. I'm like, what the hell is happening?
And then you get to come home and talk about this stuff.
I know it's a really cool
Yeah.
stuff. All right. So do you want me to go ahead and get started with mine?
Sure. Are we recording?
Oh yeah, it's recording.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Hi everybody.
Something's really broken. Oh yeah. We're live, dude. We're live. Did I leave out that part?
Crap. We're live. Okay. Yeah. No, you're good. You're good. I'm just getting into the mode here. So, oh no, there won't be any cats coming on my side because I'm in a garage and they're not allowed out here because they're troublemakers.
Yeah, and the
So.
cats on my side are on the other side of the door. Although one of those cats has been acting like a serial killer. This is what I get for naming both of my cats after serial killers. Has been acting like a serial killer. So if I hear sharpened claws at the door, I may acquiesce and let her in. So
Fair enough. Fair enough. I might hear Arby kind of meowing from the doorway to try to get in, but not going to happen. Not going to happen. All right, guys.
You want me to do this?
Yes, you go on ahead. Jason is going to do our intro and then I'll do mine.
I'm gonna do my intro.
You're gonna do yours, and then I'm gonna do mine. So you're gonna get both, because people that don't know that this is a joint recording. So Jason will have his aired on his podcast, Silver Linings Handbook, and yeah,
I'm gonna do it as a bonus. So all right, I'll go ahead and get started.
Okay.
Oh, I'm gonna do that again. Ready? This is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. I'm Jason Blair. Let's do that again. Ready?
Yep.
Start over, Jason. This is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. I'm Jason Blair. Just a few short years. Oh, Jesus Christ. Okay. I don't know. I'm not gonna start drinking again.
No. That would be the opposite of what. Just a few short years. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. I will.
Well, I don't need the edit. It's not the edit. It's my brain. It's not.
Oh, got you.
It's not the edit. All right. I'll try it one more time. This is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. I'm Jason Blair. Just a few short. Nope. Your edit is wrong now.
Oh, it is?
All right. Here, hold on. Stop. It's 1 year. It's a few days short of a year.
Oh, got you. Okay. See, this is English, and this is how we do.
One more time.
You got this, man.
This is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. I'm Jason Blair. Just a few days short of a year before I was born, Katherine and Sheila Lyon went on a walk that my parents told me would forever change the way they raised me. The two sisters, just 2 years apart, like my brother and me, went on a half-mile walk from their home 25 miles south of where we lived, ate pizza at a mall, and were never seen again, at least by anyone who loved them. By the time we moved from Maryland to Texas 4 years later, the massive search for them had come up empty. There were few leads over the years, mostly known sexual offenders, but they never seemed to pan out. When I returned to Maryland as a college student, it was a case that I would occasionally check in on. The case was so much a part of our identity that when the police finally announced a break in the case in February 2014, my father picked up the phone to call and tell me. In 2019, Mark Bowden, a former Baltimore Sun reporter and author of Black Hawk Down and Killing Pablo, wrote a book called The Last Stone, which chronicles one of the first stories he covered, the disappearance of Katherine and Sheila, and the cold case team that reinvestigated the case. 2 days ago, I found myself frozen in a panic, with anxiety rushing through me to the point where I couldn't function. It's not my normal. With the help of a friend, I unraveled it and came to the conclusion that part of what had me feeling an enormous amount of anxiety was exploring this episode. First, it was a case my parents talked to me about, and my mom died last year. Second, I have seen and written about a lot of death and innocence in my career. Finally, it reminds me of the murders of Abby Williams and Liberty Germain in Delphi, Indiana, an ongoing case of two young girls who were tragically taken too soon. Cases where young people are taken are some of the ones that affect me most deeply. In this bonus episode, I'm joined by Allison Dixon, the host of Vintage Villains, to discuss the impact of the disappearances on the family and communities, the work of the cold case detectives as they tried to turn over, as Bowden called it, the last stone, and how our lives can be shaped when the rare and unimaginable become real. Allison and I will walk you through the case, which is widely considered to be resolved, but there's some loose ends, and we'll share our theories on what we believe really happened at the end of the episode.
Excellent. All right. So you get to watch 2 shows in one, guys, and all right, my turn. This week, I traveled back to the year 1975, and I found a bad guy. Actually, I found a few. When young sisters Katherine and Sheila Lyon disappeared from a popular Baltimore area shopping mall, reporter and author Mark Bowden described it as a story that struck at suburbia's idea of itself, namely that it was safe. Today, my friend Jason Blair and I are going to talk about a case that took 40 years and a miracle to solve. But many questions about this crime still linger, leaving us to wonder if justice really has been served. We'll talk about that and oh so much more on this 2-part episode of Vintage Villains. All right.
You firmly believe we're not going to get through it today?
Well, no, I mean, because I'm not. Oh, I don't know. We'll see.
All right, let's go.
All right. Welcome to Vintage Villains, friends. I am Allison Dixon, and wouldn't you know it, we are knee deep in the 70s again. A few episodes back, when we talked about Patty Hearst, we took a cruise along the gritty boulevards of 1974, where, among other things, we glimpsed a freshly disgraced U.S. president, a world in the grip of an energy crisis, and the beginning of the end of our war in Vietnam. And if you were thinking things somehow chilled out the following year, well, listen, to if you listen to this show or dig into history long enough, you'll probably notice right away that times of peace and safety only exist in the broadest view. Zoom in a little closer, and you'll always find trouble skulking about in its various disguises. It's just a matter of if or when it decides to look in your direction. But from the safety of my ultra groovy, far out zeitgeist Zeppelin, we can take a quick gander at the world as it was in 1975, the year sisters Kate and Sheila Lyon disappeared, a world that was gradually growing more dangerous for young women in particular. Remember back in my 1974 discussion when I listed some of the women who were later discovered to be victims of serial killer Ted Bundy? Well, sadly, he would not be caught for a few more years. And so his nasty work continued in the Western US throughout 1975 with the deaths of Julie Cunningham, Lynette Culver, Denise Oliverson, Melanie Cooley, and Karen Campbell. And Bundy was only one of the serial killers who were active or were about to become active during this time. The Yorkshire Ripper, Peter Sutcliffe, was also beginning his murder career in the UK around this time. And I don't think we were too far away from the time when John Wayne Gacy started burying young men in his house's crawl space. Suffice it to say, we will be back here again and again, folks. The 70s are just thick with villainy. But what else was going on in 75? Well, the resignation of President Richard Nixon didn't end the Watergate scandal entirely. Scores of the president's men were facing consequences for their involvement in the raid of the Democratic Party headquarters in D.C. And January 1st saw the conviction of Nixon's chief of staff, H.R. Haldeman, among others, for conspiracy and obstruction of justice. Those convicted would serve anywhere from 2 to 8 years in prison. Only a few days later, President Gerald Ford would release an executive order, 11828 to be precise, establishing a commission to govern the activities of the Central Intelligence Agency, following the public revelations of many of their illegal activities over the years, namely MK Ultra, but many others, which I promise you will be discussed in detail here in an episode this summer. And rounding out what was one hell of a busy week in the new year, was the premiere of the popular game show Wheel of Fortune, which might very well have been interrupted by a special newscast when the aforementioned Patty Hearst was arrested later that fall. Elsewhere in TV, later in January, the sitcom All in the Family also premiered, a satire depicting a cantankerous father who yearns for the simplicity of yesteryear while being exasperated by his hippie children. It was a far cry from Leave It to Bieber. Bieber. Excuse me. It was a far cry from Leave It to Beaver and brilliantly demonstrated the cultural crossroads of the post Vietnam era. File it alongside MASH as comedies from decades past that were packed with a whole lot of biting social commentary. And maybe you can pull it out next time you encounter your own real life Archie bunkers that insist such things didn't exist in entertainment before 2012. On January 30th, inventor Erno Rubik patented the magic cube that would later come to bear his name. And I'll just let it be known here that I have never once solved a Rubik's Cube and probably never will. And in fact, I have half a mind to make him a vintage villain for all the headaches he's caused me throughout my life. In February, 1,800 people were married in a mass wedding conducted by the Unification Church. And if you want to know more about Sun Myung Moon's massive cult, I did an episode on them back on my other show, Ding Dong Darkness Time. I'll link it in the show notes. Elsewhere in the world, Mozambique rid itself of its Portuguese colonizers, and Ethiopia abolished its 3,000-year monarchy. Meanwhile, that very same year, Spain restored its monarchy after 31 years because some people just can't live without a king or queen, I guess. This is also the year the communist Khmer Rouge in Cambodia captured the capital city of Phnom Penh, marking the end of the Cambodian Civil War and beginning a genocidal bloodbath that would kill an estimated 1.5 to 3 million people and drive millions more to flee the country. And in case you're wondering, Pol Pot will absolutely be a vintage villain, mark my words. And while we're hanging out in Southeast Asia, we might as well make mention of April 29th, marking the official fall of Saigon and the beginning of and the end of U.S. involvement in the war, which had been deteriorating for many months as Ho Chi Minh's forces multiplied and advanced to the south. You might recall a famous photo of the helicopter on the rooftop picking up the last of the U.S. citizens who remained. North Vietnamese troops would move in and capture the city the following day, marking a sobering and humiliating end of the Vietnam era, at least for us, that had dominated the American way of life for over a decade. Over in Great Britain, Margaret Thatcher ascended to the head of the Conservative Party, heralding a period for the UK that would go down in history as a rip-roaring good time of happiness and prosperity for all, right? Uh, Meanwhile, June would also mark the first ever recorded snowfall for that month in London. Coincidence? I think not. Speaking of actual good times, though, here's a smattering of songs released in 1975 that soared up the charts. Thank God I'm a Country Boy by John Denver. Mandy by Mary Manilow. Mary Manilow? Mandy by Barry Manilow. The Best of My Love by the Eagles. Fame by David Bowie. Fight the Power by the Isley Brothers, which would later inspire the Chuck D of Public Enemy to write his rap anthem. Rhinestone Cowboy by Glenn Campbell would win Billboard's Song of the Year. Womp, womp, womp. Peter Gabriel announced his departure from the group Genesis, paving the way for Phil Collins to take the helm and later bring us the greatest drum fill of all time with In the Air Tonight. And I don't want to hear any back talk about that. In movies, The Godfather Part 2 would take home the Academy Award for Best Picture. Ellen Burstyn would win the statue for Best Actress for her turn in Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. Great movie, highly recommend it. Chinatown would win for Best Screenplay, but Jack Nicholson would only take home a Golden Globe for his part in it. In technology, June of 75 would see the release of Sony's Betamax technology, which would allow people to watch and record movies on videotape. In October of 75, the still running sketch comedy show Saturday Night Live would air its very first episode. The host was George Carlin. When comedian Richard Pryor hosted the show in December, the live broadcast would introduce its first time delay, presumably to head off any of the more indecent jokes Pryor was known for. And speaking of indecent jokes, in July, the U.S. House of Representatives voted to restore American citizenship to Confederate General Robert E. Lee. And the Supreme Court ruled in Owen v. Baker that schools were allowed to administer corporal punishment to students, albeit with some guidelines in place. In sports, Muhammad Ali continued to dominate as heavyweight champion of the world, with probably his most famous fight against fellow heavyweight Joe Frazier, taking place in the Philippines, known as the Thrilla in Manila. And now it's time, my friends, to bring the Zeitgeist Zeppelin back into port after a short glimpse at this rather dark and gritty time. I forgot to mention before that President Gerald Ford survived 2 assassination attempts that fall, one of which was by a former member of the Manson family for that extra bit of spice. But it wasn't dark everywhere. In fact, while things might have been raging in the wider world, there were places people built in their communities that were meant to bring everyone together in the safety of boutique storefronts, food courts, fountains, and movie theaters. I'm talking about shopping malls. And they were really coming to the fore in 1975 for many suburban communities that lacked a traditional town square. Of course, there was a more sinister reason behind the creation of these places and suburbs in general, but we'll probably get to that throughout the episode. Any of you listening can probably think of all the times you've spent in some excuse me. Any of you listening can probably think of all the times you've spent in some of these shrines to modernist capitalism, and I bet most of you could say that you felt pretty safe there. Except maybe you remember a time or two when someone followed you a little too close or stared a little too long. You probably also remember traveling in pairs or packs for safety. But safety, as we know, is largely an illusion we build for ourselves, so we don't have to think about the statistical gambles we're taking. My friend Jason Blair, host of the Silver Linings podcast, my friend Jason Blair, host of the Silver Linings Handbook podcast, brought this story to my attention recently, and I knew it was something we had to talk about. Not only because the story of Kate and Sheila Lyon itself is uniquely haunting, but because sitting here in 2024, many of you listening now might think it sounds like some more recent cases you've heard of. So let's get into it, shall we?
All right. 3 initial thoughts. 1975 sounds like it was a lot.
A lot.
I'm ready to take a nap already. So the second thing, I will teach you how to solve a Rubik's Cube. It's just an algorithm. Like step. Doesn't matter what the cube is.
Man, if I could master an algorithm, I would be YouTube famous right now.
It's simple. And then so I got you on the Rubik's Cube, and 75 was definitely a lot. And then the third thing, before we really dive in, the one thing I want to say about this case, the Lyon sisters' disappearance, is that it was one of those iconic cases like Delphi was to Delphi, Indiana, or maybe the murder of Samantha Koenig was to Anchorage, Alaska, when she was killed by Israel Keys. It changed everything.
Right.
You know, when you talk about an event that caused people to finally start to lock their doors in the Washington, D.C. area and started, that notion of kids who couldn't stray far from their home and some adult always had to be washing them. This was really a case where that truly happened.
Yes.
And, there's this quote that one of the detectives who later worked on the case said, he said his wife's parents, or her wife's parents had said, or excuse me, his wife's parents said to him that they remembered the case, right? So he's about my contemporary. They remember the case, and it was the permanent loss of innocence in the region. So that's the kind of impact it had. So,
It's interesting too to think about how regional this can be as well. I would say, for that sort of mid-Atlantic, DC area region, this case had that. And then if you think of one, I certainly, like you said, Delphi in Indiana. And I think that was one reason why we wanted to talk about this because it's amazing the parallels that there are between these cases. And as we go through it, um, a lot of you that are listening right now, as we record this live, will probably be picking up on a lot of those parallels as well. Um,
yeah. And I
yeah.
wanted to sort of jump in and give credit, right?
Mhm.
We did some of our own original research on this. I looked at some court records, but also Mark Bowden's The Last Stone 2019 book on the case. Amazing. He covered it as a
So good.
Baltimore Sun reporter. Yeah, just amazing. There's some great reporting in the Washington Post, the Frederick News Post, um, Baltimore News American, which you can get in the archives, and the Baltimore Sun, but also some really great stuff on the Charlie Project and other spots like that,
Mhm.
related to the case.
Yeah, I think anybody who Googles this case will probably get the Washington Post article that Bowden wrote once the suspect was indicted or tried. I can't remember, where he gives a whole kind of breakdown of the case, which it makes for a nice summary for his own book. But the book just expands so much more
Yeah.
onto it. Really well written.
And so for me, like I've always sort of taken this case so personally. There are a lot of intersections between my life in this case. It happened not far from where I was born. Nearly I was born a year later. Key events and the locations we're going to be talking about are right beside the university where I went to college. Some of the key witness sightings are in Virginia, literally like a quarter mile from the church that I went to when we were there. And then, my first semester of college, I went to Liberty University in Lynchburg, Virginia, 200 miles away, right near where we're going to end up at the end of this story. So I'll go ahead and, get rolling. So our story really starts between 11 a.m. and 12 p.m. on Tuesday, March 25th. That's when 13-year-old Sheila Lyon and her 10-year-old sister, Kate or Catherine, ooh, sorry, wrong. That is them. Um,
Yes.
yeah, right. That is them, but this is the one I wanted to do. Um, her 10-year-old sister, Kate or Catherine, left their suburban Kensington, Maryland home. It's in a Washington, D.C. suburb right outside of the city. So they were headed, about a half mile, little less than a half mile from the home, to a place called Wheaton Plaza, which is the local mall. Sheila was a student at the local junior high school. Catherine was a student at a local elementary school. But Katherine and Sheila's father, John, and he was resting as they left. He had worked the night shift as a DJ at WLAM radio, which is one of our popular radio stations, and it was an ABC affiliate. And their mom, Mary, had gone bowling with some of her friends. The girls had sort of coordinated this with their mom, and their brothers had gone to some of their friends' houses. And Mary, their mom, was really thrilled that the girls were going to Wheaton Plaza. She had later said that she had felt the girls hadn't been spending as much time together as they used to. So she was happy they really went there together. And so the girls agreed with their mom that they'd be home by their curfew at 4 p.m. And the girls had $2 between them to buy pizza at the mall. And the classmates saw Katherine and Sheila at about 1 p.m. outside the Orange Bowl Pizza Parlor inside the mall. Around the same time, a witness later said that they noticed a man in the area with a slight limp, younger man who appeared to be following different girls there, and a man in his 50s or his 60s. who was about 6 feet tall, carrying a briefcase around the mall. People later said that man with the briefcase had a microphone in it and a cassette recorder, and he was periodically sort of stopping to record children speaking from a script he had in the recorder. And one 13-year-old witness said that he and his friends thought the man was a reporter and joked about going over to be interviewed by him. And among the people who were at the mall that day uh, was a man named Lloyd Lee Welch, an 18-year-old carnival worker who lived with his parents about 13 miles away at 4714 Baltimore Avenue, which we'll
Y-
go.
Yeah, and I wanted to make mention, keep in your head this tape recorder guy. Not Well, for a few different reasons. You're gonna hear, if you go and search about this story on Reddit or anywhere online, you'll see a lot of people talking about this tape recorder guy. And I found it really interesting because multiple witnesses corroborated his presence there. And he was also seen at other malls in the area with that tape recorder. And a lot of people said, or have ventured to say, that his job was probably getting like B-roll or sound bites for like commercials or jingles or advertisements and um stuff like that, and that maybe not necessarily a creep, but depending on what accounts you read, some people are going to read more into his presence or not. So I'm just putting that out there to keep in your mind as we go along here.
Yeah. And for those of you who are joining us online, you can see a picture. This is, Katherine and Sheila's childhood home in Kensington. And this is, and like you said, Allison, we were talking about, it's so 1970s.
Hmm.
This is Wheaton Plaza, the mall that they were going to. And you can see on this map here, here's where the Loyns' home was, and here's where Wheaton Plaza Mall was. So it was a very short walk in a really populated area of that not a very far walk for the girls.
Yeah, I think the last stone said it was maybe about 2 miles, something like that. It
Mhm.
wasn't too far. And also this mall is sort of an outdoor mall. It has like a long promenade, and the stores you can walk in front of, and then there was like a little covered thing, almost like how you would imagine like a carport or something like that, that you could walk under. And there was an access tunnel that had buses. I think, was it buses or trains? I can't remember, that could come into it. The mall
Buses.
is, yeah, buses, and the mall is still there, but it was enclosed, so it's an enclosed mall now, and it's a lot more modernized. I actually went and looked to see if it was like one of those abandoned malls that you kind of see around, but it's
No, it's gone
still,
through 2 renovations. It got
yeah,
enclosed when I was in college and then redone in the last few years as well. Uh,
yeah,
it's weird to go there, having grown up in the area.
I
Like, it's
bet.
very weird to be, like, shopping for jeans where, this happened. Um, you know, what one of the things sort of following in that timeline, it was about what 2:30 p.m. Sheila and Catherine, their older brother, actually shows up with his friends and spots them eating pizza at the Orange Bowl. And the girls' curfew, like I had mentioned before, was supposed to be 4 p.m. Um, but an important caveat to that is Sheila was supposed to be home at 3 p.m. to begin her route delivering the Washington Evening Star newspaper in the neighborhood. And she didn't show up, and that was the first sign that there was something wrong. Around 4 p.m., when they didn't show up for curfew, Mary became really concerned. She later told police and newspapers that they were almost always on time. By 7 p.m., after the family had sat down for dinner and the girls still hadn't showed up, Mary called the Montgomery County Police Department, and a massive manhunt began immediately. Which, we constantly hear about cases where someone's missing and there's a delayed response. We don't normally see a delayed response when it comes to children.
Right.
Um, and the police report searching the mall, like you said, the bus sub basement,
Hmm.
uh, under it, heating ducts looking for the girls. The next day, the Maryland State Police added helicopters to join the search. But by 3 days later, by the 28th, the police report that they were just running out of places to search. And they noted that they had handed out by that point like 5,000 flyers at motels, hotels, banks, and other locations. Flyers had the girls' pictures on them and descriptions of them and what they were wearing. The police had also entered the girls' information into the FBI's National Crime Information Center database. It was something that was created, I think, in 1969. But it was a database that we commonly hear about today as NCIC. And it was a computerized, and is a computerized index of all sorts of criminal justice information, not just charges and evidence, that's available to state, federal, local, tribal law enforcement 24 hours a day, 365 days a week.
I wanted to ask you really quick. This just occurred to me. Do you think their location being sort of in the DC, like Baltimore area, kind of spurred some of that because it's such a populated area with a lot of
Well,
law enforcement around, stuff like that? Or
it's a wealthy suburban area outside of the
yeah.
nation's capital with a local celebrity and its two
Oh,
white blonde kids.
right, right. And that needs to be noted as well that, this setting, this suburban setting and a lot of suburban settings and shopping malls, as I alluded to earlier, they largely came into existence due to a lot of white people fleeing their urban environment or being encouraged to leave the urban environment. And there was a lot of problems in a lot of the cities at the time, in the 1970s, a lot of crime and drugs and, things like that. And so what it ended up creating though was this facade, this illusion that, oh, we've left this city. And so we have these beautiful front yards, white picket fences, and this beautiful little shopping mall that we can all go to and be safe. And that is why I think largely that this case shocked so many at this time was because I think a lot of people just thought that kind of thing doesn't happen here. We're in the suburbs. But as we know,
And
anybody, that's not true.
well, I think it's true. I think your point's true.
Mhm.
But I also think it's exacerbated by it being the Washington, D.C. suburbs.
Right.
You're
Right.
talking about a place that has one of the highest rates of college graduates and master's degree holders at the time. You're talking about one of the wealthiest areas. And I'm not to say that crime doesn't happen in those places, because we're not dumb and we know it does, and
Right.
it's often hidden.
Mhm.
Um, but the perception or the impression that people can
Right.
buy their safety by moving out into the suburbs. It was a big thing in the 70s. It was also a reaction to desegregation to move
Yes.
out to the suburbs. People thought they were buying their safety on a lot of levels by moving to suburban areas.
Yeah.
So just keeping with the timeline. So we're at the 28th when they're really worried that they're running out of options. So a day later is Catherine's 11th birthday, and there's still no traces of the girls. By the 31st, the Montgomery County Police release a composite sketch that's based on the view of a 13-year-old witness, who we'll talk about in a second. So this gives you an idea of some of the searching that they were doing. But here in this image, for the people who are online, these are the two sketches of what would become known as Tape Recorder Man.
Yeah.
In addition to Tape Recorder Man, several extortion type phone calls were made to the Lyon family
This
in
was
the weeks
awful.
with the parents. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The
Mhm.
most serious call came from an unidentified man on April 4th. He demanded that Mr. Lyon leave a briefcase with $10,000 inside of an Annapolis, Maryland courthouse restroom. Which, let me pause there to say that, like, if you want to get ransom money, you may not pick a law enforcement building as the best place to do it, because
Right.
needless to say, it was not hard for them to scout the area. So the money was left per the instructions, but it was never claimed. Perhaps he realized what an insane idea that was. Please drop off the ransom money at the police station. Um,
Right. God.
so
Unbelievable.
Right? So the caller later maintained that police had surrounded the courthouse and he couldn't retrieve the ransom, which I also found funny because police are already in the courthouse. But before the money would be offered to the man again, they said to him that you've got to show evidence that you have the girls. And the caller said he'd be in touch with the family, but never called back. So
Yeah, it's and I know that John, the father, had spoken about numerous things. They'd been led astray by psychics. I think somebody who claimed that they had solved some high profile murder. It's not in my notes, but I read it yesterday. And they they decided after all these tips, like this psychic said that they're buried, they're like in a lake or something, and then they went and dragged a lake that was nearby, and it was just, after a whole bunch of that, they just kind of started closing themselves off, which was unusual for them because, again, John was a radio personality. He was a known quantity, and this family was used to that. They were used to having people over. They were used to being open to the public. And so while it created this groundswell of public response, uh, it kind of started to bite them a little bit, because when you let everybody in to give you tips, you're going to end up with charlatans and liars as well.
Well, and
So
publicity has its upsides and downsides, as you'll see in this case. There are moments where there's evidence that 40 years later we would not have without publicity. And you could also make the argument the reason why it took 40 years to solve the case is because of so much publicity. So, we'll talk about this more later, but there was another composite sketch that didn't really match the description of the tape recorder man, the guy with the microphone and recorder. This sketch describes a 5', 11-inch man in his late 20s, or excuse me, late teens or early 20s, acne on his face, scars on the left cheekbone, light mustache, wearing a Peters jacket, a blue and white horizontal striped shirt, and white pants. He was said to have dark hair that was slightly below his shoulders. So, part of what happens in the desperation, they reach out to the Philadelphia police, and Allison had mentioned the Patty Hearst case before. The Philadelphia Police Department brings down that dog handler and two 90-pound, nationally known German Shepherds that were used to track Patty Hearst and her location at the Symbionese Liberation Army outpost. They brought them down to Montgomery County to help with the search for the sisters, the search near the girl's home, the mall, locations in between. And,
yeah,
one of those
the
fascinating connections.
it is. And, I mean, like I said, a lot of these stories throughout the 70s sort of dovetail into each other, just mentioning, the Mansons and how one of them tried to kill the president. And then here we are with another big sensationalist story that was going on at this time. In this point of 1975, in April, Patty Hearst would be lying low with her few remaining members of the SLA, after most of them had been killed in a gunfight the year prior. So by August of 75, they would be blamed for planting pipe bombs under police cars. But then by September, she and her remaining cohorts would be arrested. And but really, the case was still making really big news at that time, at the same time that this was happening. So as you said earlier, Jason, 75 was a lot. And this is just one slice of it.
Well,
And so the news had to be so just brimming, right?
yeah, but coming back to that point, that's actually a decent point, because one of the things that really surprised me in going back, because as a negative 1-year-old, I did not get a chance to see the coverage.
I was a negative 4-year-old. Imagine how I felt.
Right? Yeah, exactly. So, although, my powers are amazing, but I don't have that one. But in going back and looking at the coverage, it's surprising to me in the DC and Baltimore papers how this story bumped everything off the page. Huge political stories. It bumped everything off the page. So I found that piece of it relatively fascinating, for just in general. And I mentioned that sketch because that sketch comes back, and it's really important later in the case, but not to put a too fine point on the publicity problem, is that it's really easy to lose great tips in those situations. We saw that in the Delphi murders case that I had mentioned before, where the police opened the file in, the murders happened in 2017. The girls' bodies were found in February 14th of 2017. It wasn't until the summer of 2022 that they found a tip from the first week that led there. And hold on to that original sketch, because that eventually becomes lost. We're later in the story, we're going to find out, because I'm not hiding the ball, that that a man named Lloyd Lee Welch is eventually goes within a week of the
Yeah.
disappearances. He goes, he says, or his mother says, high on weed, to provide the description of the older man who's stopping the young girls. So that's our guy we've got on the screen now, tape recorder man. Just
Yeah.
right, just remember this part. The description that he gives fits the man with the briefcase who is providing the script to the children. But do not forget, keep in mind that that description of that man has been in the newspapers, on TV, in radio days before the witness. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay.
It is absolutely fair. And if that, sounds familiar, like this whole thing of like a couple different sketches, competing sketches here, that might sound a little familiar. Again, as we talk about parallels to Delphi, again, two young girls go disappear from a public place, and then there's multiple witnesses seeing different people. And then, we're not sure who to be on the lookout for, but then we have a guy here who goes and inserts himself into the investigation, purportedly to assist, heavy air quotes here if you're seeing me on the screen, but most likely to redirect.
Well, and also, Allison, the cops know that, right? Anybody who
Right.
inserts himself into the investigation, like Richard Allen did in Delphi, anybody who inserts themselves into an investigation is always going to get the attention of the police, or should always. So Lloyd is eventually interviewed, given a polygraph, which he failed.
Yeah.
And you and I have some theories about why this kind of gets written off. Polygraphs.
Yeah.
Cops give them
Polygraphs.
about as much weight as you and I do.
Yeah, and and that's the thing, is that any podcast you listen to on true crime, will say mostly pretty much the same thing about polygraphs, that they are, of course, we all know, not admissible in court, and they come with packed with a lot of problems, a lot of biases. They are used, however, as an investigative tool, and as we talk later, whether in this episode or the next one, we're really going to bring to the fore about how it really was used in an investigative way that may or may not bolster your faith in the technology, or maybe tell you to say, yeah, we really need to stop using this tool. But hold on here. Oh, what I want to say though about why they wrote it off, he failed the polygraph. But the thing that gets me is that Welch comes in there and says this, gives this statement and provides this information, fails the polygraph. They go, oh, he's just a stupid pothead, just turn him loose. But they had the composite sketch given by the girl who spied him at the mall that day, talking to the girls, leering at the girls. In fact, she was so disturbed by what she had seen that I can't remember, Jason, was she the one who taunted him and said, take a picture, it'll last longer, or something
Right,
like that? Yeah.
right.
And then she went and immediately informed security. They get the sketch artist out there. They draw up a sketch of a guy who looks a heck of a lot like Lloyd Lee Welch, but the cops somehow, because they
Well,
were overwhelmed at the time with tips and
I'm not sure if it's just that. I
yeah,
think that so many people reported the tape recorder guy. It
yeah,
became a volume of reports, as opposed to, Lloyd's behavior was definitely weirder, but
yes,
the volume of reports, and you can get, I hate to use the phrase tunnel vision, but it's confirmation bias.
yeah,
Everybody's pointing to this, and then all of a sudden, this guy who happens to meet the description of the other guy comes in and gives me a description of the guy I already think is
Yes, and that was the other thing. He wasn't really bringing anything new to the table. If anything, they just kind of like, "Well, okay, this is a
Witness.
neutral, this is a wash, and he's a lying druggie, whatever, just turn him loose." Um, very
So
much, a thing that will probably haunt them for a very long time.
yeah, so and in thinking about that, as you start to follow in the timeline and you start to follow the story, I don't think it's unreasonable for the police to pursue the tape recorder guy angle. I think the hard thing for investigators, same thing with reporters, same thing with anyone else who does any investigation, is keep your mind open.
Yes.
Sometimes have separate teams looking at different leads, even if they aren't as strong. Because on April 6th, so I think, and there's some disputes about whether this happened on the 6th or not. But about 38 miles from Wheaton Plaza, an 11-year-old boy named William Krebs is sitting in a car in a parking lot of a tire store on Route 29. I mean, like a mile away from where my current office is right now. And
Wow.
a mile in another direction from the church, and he was waiting for his mother when he noticed a two-door sedan with what he believed were two girls who were bound and gagged in the car. Cars headed southbound on Route 29 toward Warrenton, Virginia. And that road goes to Culpeper, Charlottesville, where UVA is, and eventually to Lynchburg, Virginia. It carries on beyond that to the state border. But Krebs said he noticed one of the girls who fit the description of Katherine in the front seat of the car. And then a second girl appeared to be in the back seat. And what caught his attention, Krebs said, was that it appeared as if both girls were trying to stand up. He said the girl in the front seat, who matched that description of Katherine, appeared to be crying. So he couldn't make out the other woman or girl in the back of the car, but he did see one that matched the description of Katherine. And he said the car was moving really slowly. And so Krebs and his mother immediately make a report to the Fairfax County Police. And by the next day in the area, people are jumping on CB radios to look for the girls.
And, I wanna talk a little bit about the use of CBs, citizens band radios back in the '70s, especially. We might, not realize sort of the historical impact, and kind of the good that they did and why people were using them, and why it sounds like everybody had one, sort of like a predecessor to cell phones, smartphones, social media. Found a great article on this, but um, basically, in the mid 1970s, there was this whole sort of culture that formed around it, largely because of the energy crisis. That was going on at the time. Gas shortages were a big thing. And you might have heard of the movie Convoy or the song Convoy, or Smokey and the Bandit, and some of these other movies that sort of popped out around this time. And it was mostly because the truckers could set up these convoys and go look ahead to see where they could find gasoline, and sort of people could listen in and find out, because that's how bad it was. You couldn't go to your corner gas station and likely get any gas. It was a pretty messed up time period. So, in response to a lot of this, the FCC set aside 40 channels on the radio dial for citizen use. And so it became a very big fad at this time. And so, of course, overnight, Americans sort of adopted these handles or nicknames, and learned this language of communicating by radio. Um, and so it was just very common that you would see like a lot of people in the neighborhood would have a CB, and so it played an interesting role in this case.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
so also around the same day or the next day, reports really vary on this one as well. A motorist on Route 234, about 5 miles from Centerville in Manassas, Virginia, where the Battle of Manassas and the Battle of Bull Run were fought. An IBM employee notices a station wagon, and he said he saw one girl who appeared to be gagged in the car. This is
right.
quickly reported to the Prince William County Police, and the Virginia State Police send out helicopters. The witness in Manassas says that the girls or that at least one girl was bound and gagged in the vehicle. It was about 7:30 a.m. When the driver spots the witness, when the driver of the car with the girls in it spots the witness, he runs a red light and heads toward Interstate 66 in Virginia, which heads south. The station wagon, or what is now Interstate 66, the station wagon had Maryland license plates with a possible combination of DMT-6. Couldn't see the last two numbers because the car's license plate was bent. A very common thing when you steal a car, you don't want to be out
Mm-hmm.
back then. Bend, it doesn't work so well now with license plate readers from cops. Bend the license plate or distort it slightly. And so that known combination I mentioned, Cumberland, Maryland, which is out west, Hagerstown, which is in the middle of the state, Baltimore, which is east on the Chesapeake Bay. So a search of the plate numbers fails to produce any good information at the time. Databases are not as good as they are now. It wasn't as easy to search state records by the license plate numbers. You can even see in the list killings up in Long Island. Part of what they did was they identified, they used driving records, and even in the 2000s in New York, you could only search certain ways by name or by X, Y, or Z. You couldn't search by all the fields. And so, the witness report at first is treated really credibly, but later marked questionable by police. But when cold case detectives reopened the case, they believe that this is the last credible sighting of one of the girls, according to the last stone. So the trail eventually goes cold, but witnesses are able to sort of see that partial license plate. Not entirely sure what state it came from, but it's got this
Yeah,
letter.
and they said that every state up in that area had its own, bicentennial plate, which was a new plate, and of course, just a reminder, the bicentennial would be the following year, so there was a lot of that, in the air as well.
Yeah, and I just want to point out, there are thousands of missing children cases every year.
Mhm.
Those children that are taken by strangers are only 1/100th of 1%. So about 100 cases a year in the United States. And that number has changed very little since statistics on it have been kept. So most missing children are found quickly. They're often with a relative or somebody who knows them. So for one, two, to be taken once and disappear completely is so rare that you can almost say it virtually never happens. We hear about it because those are the big cases, but it's very rare. The FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit and the National Center for Violent Crime Apprehension, they have crime analysts who collaborate there. They can't even draw conclusions about it. It's that rare. They won't even profile it.
And it's usually the first thing people think. If 2 disappear, then obviously more than one person had to be involved. I mean, you hear that a lot with Delphi, but we're gonna have a lot to say about that as
Yeah.
well.
Well,
Um,
and we know the reality is the statistics are if two people are killed, it's likely one perpetrator. Even though
right.
people kind of feel as if there needs to be more. I think we underestimate, particularly when it comes to children, how much the voice of authority can
Yes.
push people into
And
compliance.
if you threaten one in order to get the compliance of the other, that is usually how you manage that. And yes, if it is a person of authority, usually, yeah, man or woman, honestly, a child will obey authority. That's what we train them to kind of do,
And it's
especially
also
at that age.
worth it to keep in mind that in a lot of these cases, it's not using authority. It's about convincing them or giving them something, or
Hmm.
it's persuasion is a tool that's used. So, years later, one of the things that we find out from Lloyd Lee Welsh's cousins is that soon after the girls disappear, Lloyd and his girlfriend, Helen Carver, who was pregnant at the time, showed up 230 miles away at the home of Lloyd's aunt, Lizzie Parker, in southwestern Virginia on what's known as Taylor's Mountain. Um, Unlike suburban Maryland or Northern Virginia, Taylor's Mountain is deep in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, deep in coal country. It's a few miles from a small town called Bedford. It's about 40 miles west of Lynchburg and about 20 miles east of Roanoke. So it's really deep within the Southwest Virginia mountains. And, Southwest Virginia is a really mountainous region, westernmost part of the Commonwealth. Most of Southwest Virginia is west of the Eastern Continental Divide and on the Appalachian Plateau itself. But Taylor's Mountain is sort of on the eastern side, right on the edge of that. Historically, the area remains pretty rural. In the 20th century, coal mining was an important part of the economy around there. With its decline, or the decline in the number of coal jobs and the decline of tobacco as a cash crop in the area east of there, Southwest Virginia really has tried to boost its economy through things like tourism. But, the 1970s, 80s, and 90s were sort of some of the darker times in the mountains and the hollers. Like much of the Blue Ridge Mountains and Appalachian Mountain communities, the people who live near Taylor's Mountain were quite isolated. Taylor's Mountain was populated by a small group of insular families. In fact, people would later report that the Bedford County Sheriff's deputies considered Taylor's Mountain a, quote, no-go zone, and residents would later report that the deputies were afraid to go there. One of Lloyd's cousins would later say, when being interviewed for a documentary on the Lyon sisters, his quote was, "Do I think bad things happen on the mountain? Yes. If they were to take those new forensic equipment, would they find all these things?" Then she nodded before adding, "What happens on the mountain stays on the mountain."
Yeah, I remember watching the documentary for this, which, Who Killed the Lyon Sisters, and it's on, right now. Well, Investigation Discovery did it. I found it on the Roku channel, on my own, device, so, you'll have to do a search for it to see if you can find it. And when it got to this part of the documentary, because I had not known the entirety of this case yet, it really took a turn into Hills Have Eyes territory. It's no joke, about the isolation and the sort of, uh, lawlessness that happens up there. It's very remote. You have these families that sorta own that piece of land. This is not a place that if you were lost in the woods, um, that you had taken a wrong turn off of a path somewhere on the Appalachian Trail, you would not want to turn up at Taylor's Mountain asking for aid. Um, so knowing that these girls were taken, from this mall, this very populated mall, and then eventually, very likely delivered here, and we'll get to that much later, it really added a another layer of depth and fear to this case. That, wow, you know, this is what's kind of on the back door of civilization. You go just 40 miles outside of town and you're in a place like Taylor's Mountain.
Yeah, and because years later, Lloyd's cousin Connie says that Lloyd and Helen show up in a station wagon with a large green army duffel bag that was bloody and had clothes in it. Connie says she had noticed a really foul smell, and when Connie asked Lloyd what was in the bag, he said that he and Helen had picked up hamburger meat and that it had gone bad. Connie said Helen was pregnant, so the police concluded that was probably the spring of 1975. Um,
Yeah, and again, the girls disappeared in March, early March or mid-March.
yep.
So this would be roughly, some weeks after the disappearance.
hmm And so Connie's brother, Henry Parker, would say that he didn't look at the bag, but Lloyd told him he had a dead dog in it. Henry helped Lloyd toss the bag in a bonfire that became sort of infamous on the mountain. People talked about it decades later. They said it raged for many, many days. Smelled terrible too.
Yeah, a lot of people reported the smell was very distinctively that of burning flesh.
Yeah.
Um,
And so it's super important to note here that Connie and Henry told these stories to the police decades later and after
mhm.
years of not speaking to each other. They were estranged and they had had a falling out over the inheritance, including their mother's house on Taylor Mountain.
And it's
So
important to keep that in mind too, that this information came independently, separately many years later, because people are going to have questions about this. So we should set that stage because we'll be kind of dovetailing back to some of these things
right,
as we go.
right. It just adds, when people aren't speaking to each other and they've got the same
Mhm.
story, it adds a lot of credibility to it. So,
Right.
Connie would later say in a Facebook exchange with a relative, Amy Welsh Johnson, that, quote, "My biggest fear is that my last family member, Henry, was a part of it on the mountain." She would later tell a grand jury that her brother often hung out with Lloyd when Lloyd visited. She also told the grand jury, in reference to that message, when she was asked about that message, "Henry wouldn't murder a child. He wasn't in Maryland. I meant help bury it. If he helped bury the bodies on the mountain." And so
Yeah.
Henry had been questioned by the Bedford police the first day they visited Connie on that same day. And he said, and I think this is pretty significant, that when Lloyd had visited in 1975, there had been talk even then among family members about Lloyd's involvement in the Loyne sisters case. So almost 40 years before his name is publicly linked to it, Henry says his family was talking about it. Henry said even before Lloyd came to Taylor's Mountain, his mom and dad had said it out loud to him and wondered about whether he was involved. But the
Mm.
detectives, the cold case detectives, had reason to suspect that Lloyd had been more than a help. I mean, Henry had been more than a helper. His sister, Connie, had told them about a sexual interest that he had had in her as a child, including one pre-planned assault that she had escaped from.
Yeah, this family is, as we'll soon find, and it gets a good bit more disturbing, um, as it goes on. One of our listeners here, Leslie, said it's Virginia's Deliverance, and Taylor's Mountain and she uh, is familiar with this part of the country as well. So, and I have not been, but I've been to like West Virginia and that. So, uh they have that isolation, they have that ability to kinda, like, do a lot of these depraved things and not be observed,
Well, I've had those
and
moments in Appalachia when I'm driving in a mountain, certainly when I was reporting and then, just living near uh near the Blue Ridge Mountains, the Allegheny Mountains. I'm not too far where I have definitely taken a turn on the street and
mhm,
gone up a little bit and literally backed out without like turning the car around because I'm like, we need to get out of here right now. It's
right.
just not, it's not a and you also see these places in other places other than Appalachia. You go
Oh,
up
yeah.
to northern Vermont or northern New York along the Canadian border.
Honestly,
There,
Washington State.
yeah,
Yeah,
so it's not just an Appalachian thing, but
yeah.
there's
It's
yeah.
it's a rural thing, it's a you know?
I don't even think it's that because you can see it in, really urban cities. I could take you into areas in New York where you
That is
walk the
true.
block instantly and you'd be like, "I am not welcome here."
There
Um,
is that feeling of they could tell you're not from around there, and it does have, like, a territorial feeling to it, and it is interesting how some places are like that and some places are not.
well, so
Um,
I think there are 2 things at play, like, when you look at Appalachia in particular, we'll talk about this, there's a lot of anger and resentment, right?
right.
And we'll talk about this a little bit more as we go on. And I think that's a commonality in other places that they're insular. There's a lot of anger and resentment. You're coming in as an outsider with already negative 5 points, which is
Yes.
completely, I think on some levels, it's really understandable that there's a reason why a lot of people in Appalachia are suspicious of outsiders. They have not brought good things often.
Right.
Um, so just jumping into Lloyd a little bit. Lloyd was born on December 30th, 1956. His childhood got really ugly fast. He would later say that his father, Lee Welsh, killed his mother, Margaret Ann, when Lloyd was 2 years old, and when Lee was driving drunk and crashed the car. The
Oh,
two,
do you have a picture of him by chance that
no,
we might be able to put up? Okay.
nope, nope.
Alright.
The two twin sisters she was carrying also died in the accident.
Sad.
Um, Lloyd cycled through a series of foster homes until he was 7 years old, when Lee and his new wife, Edna, his stepmom, picked him up and brought him home to Hyattsville, Maryland, an edge city on the northeast edge of DC. It's sort of east and south of where Wheaton Plaza is. Uh, and that it's an area, Hyattsville's an area where many members of Lloyd's large sort of extended family lived. And Lee, Edna, and Lloyd lived at 4714 Baltimore Avenue. It's a stone's throw from the entrance to the University of Maryland, but a wholly different world. By 16, Lloyd was hanging out on the street and in abandoned buildings, fending for himself, staying at different homes and shelters. That area of US Route 1 along Baltimore Avenue was known at one point as like Hillbilly Highway, because Scotch, Irish, Appalachian families had made their way to northern cities like DC and Baltimore after World War II. You know, Billytown, if you've ever heard about it in Baltimore, is another one of those places where folks from Western Maryland had come, often for labor jobs and industry. Lots of folks from Western Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and sometimes in the example of Hillbilly Highway and Billytown, created their own cultures within that seemed a lot like Taylor's Mountain within these suburban communities. So, it's something. It has the same appearance as the rest of the suburbs around, but there's really this subculture there. And one of the points I wanted to make, Allison, is that Appalachian families have prospered over the past 40 years, and clans like the Welsh family are hardly the most persecuted minorities in American history, but I do want to acknowledge that they were persecuted.
Yes.
But elements of their exclusion and isolation really remain and can kick up that resentment and anger I was talking about.
Oh, absolutely. And, you could look at some of the more famous stories. For instance, the stories of the Hatfields and the McCoys, these feuds between families that happened in that region of the country or thereabouts. And so, yeah, I can absolutely see that exclusion, that isolation that, led to some unfortunate incidents.
Yeah. And so later it would become clear in the investigation that almost all the women who were cousins in Lloyd's family had said they had been sexually abused by other family members. Lloyd portrayed himself as an innocent victim of sexual abuse in his family. However, he pleaded guilty to molesting one little girl in Virginia, arguing that the girl used to get in bed with her mom before he came around. And he thought one night that he was cuddling her mom, and it must have been the girl, and he touched her private area. I think it's really important to note that you will find out as we go on, Lloyd is one of the most exceptional liars I have ever seen.
Oh, he lies so much that I don't even think he realizes it half the time.
Zero remorse for being caught.
I mean, not at all. I mean, and he will spend hours spouting out lie after lie after lie, and then all of a sudden do a reverse and give you a half truth that will then send you on a goose chase. And I want to say that this kind of reminded me a little bit of the testimonies of Israel Keys when he was being interviewed by the FBI. He toyed with them so much that, giving them little bits and pieces of things, and then they would get him up against the wall and then he'd pivot, and you just couldn't nail him down. And Welch is very similar here.
Yeah, and it's, some of it can be to save face, some of it can be for other reasons, but I think a lot of them, Julia Cowley over at the Consult podcast, and my friend who's a former FBI profiler, and I talk about this notion of like, when you find a killer, particularly a sexually motivated killer, who gets sexual gratification from killing, once you've caught them, they have no opportunity for that gratification anymore. And one of the ways that they can get gratification is by duping you. So their duping you just becomes extension of the same sexual gratification that they were getting from murder. But, Lloyd went on to have quite a criminal career. His resume of crimes is quite impressive. His criminal record stretched, you know, uh,
Across
from
many states.
yeah, across many
Yeah.
states, long after he walked into Wheaton Plaza.
Mhm.
There wasn't much progress in the case between 1975 and 2001, but one suspect did emerge. Um, in that one suspect. So at one point, the in 2011, the cold case team goes to Quantico and they visit the FBI's BAU to discuss the case. A lot of us hear about child abduction cases and make a lot of assumptions. That point Allison was making, like that they're two victims, and it requires multiple perpetrators. The second one is that each sexual predator who's murdered a child victim has done it before, has either done a sexual crime before. I, you know, Julia will remind you, everybody's got to start somewhere.
That's exactly what I was gonna say.
So,
Love you, Julia.
right, exactly, exactly. That woman, yeah, she really puts it succinctly.
She
Um,
does.
you know, Either way, it makes sense. None of you'll be shocked that the detectives focused on known pedophiles. And one suspect that they came across was a petty criminal named Roy Molesky. He turned out to be a petty criminal, a killer, an audacious pedophile who, like
Very
Orville
much.
Welch, had inserted himself into the investigation. In 1975, he called the Montgomery County Police 2 times, first with a suggestion that they should offer immunity to the person who kidnapped the girls, which, by the way, would raise a red flag for me if the person
Mhm.
returned them. And then he called 2 weeks after the girls disappeared with a tip for where he said he had seen the gray haired tape recorder man weeks before the sisters disappeared, trying to lure children into a car at another mall. He gave a super detailed account. 2 years later, so 1977, Molesky shot and killed his wife and one of his sons. In prison for those crimes, he constantly talked a lot about the Loyne sisters, telling other inmates he knew where the girls were. Police who investigated those claims excavated his backyard. When he killed his wife and his daughter, the police found a note about the Loyne sister that he had written on the table. But in that excavation, they were unable to find anything.
I really wanna drive that home too, that Ray Molesky is probably the biggest red herring in this story. Because again, I'm not gonna hold all my cards back here.
I don't know. We haven't gotten to my theories yet.
Yeah, okay, well, but yeah, because our theories will be interesting, to say the least, I think. Um, but there are a number of tape recorder man is probably, the ultimate king daddy red herring, I feel. But
Maybe,
Molesky, oh,
maybe,
yeah. Yeah,
maybe.
just a little bit. Don't you dare. That is so
I
true.
no. I
But
mean, I think there's a way that some of these stories could come together.
yeah, but then that just kind of makes me feel like the guy on It's Always Sunny, with the big board behind him with the strings tying everything
I would
together.
say I have a firm belief that lying is a difficult art as someone
Yeah.
as someone who has mastered it. So when you tell a big lie and you were trying to con someone and you're doing a detailed lie, you tell a big lie about the big thing, but all the
Mhm.
details around it are often based on real things.
Yes.
So I'm not writing anything off at this point.
No, Molesky, though, I will say, I do think he is largely a red herring. However, uh, bad guy, known quantity, and known to Lloyd Lee Welch. I think Welch tried to underplay his association with Molesky, um, for whatever reason. And I find this incredibly interesting for a number of reasons. One, the police end up honing in on Molesky as, their guy, right? And they focus on him. Like Jason mentioned, they wanted to excavate this basement. They even went to a judge to try to get clearance for it and couldn't do it. They scoped out property and watched it. I mean, they really focused hard on Molesky. So when Welch had an opportunity to pin it all on him, he didn't. So we'll get to that in a bit, but it's just interesting to me. Here's your perfect guy right here. He's a known pedophile. He has victims that are a lot like, although he went after boys as well.
Yep.
Um, and yet here we are. So I find the Molesky element of this case fascinating.
Yeah,
To say the least.
I wouldn't rule anything out quite yet. The,
I mean, you can't rule anything out completely
well,
because we literally don't have all the answers here.
keep your
Um,
mind open. It could have been Odinus. No, I'm just kidding. It wasn't. So
there's always the Odinus.
so uh, a young police cadet named Ed Cullen, he had joined the search effort for the Lyon sisters as a cadet 30 years before this time. He was assigned to the cold case team in 2011 around the time that they had gone down to the FBI. And that's usually in most police departments the last stop before you hang up your badge. And like many detectives before him, he reopened, and this is a common thing in Montgomery, he reopened the Loin files, ending his career with the same case he started it. And still, there were no bodies, no crime scene. But after 30 years, the girls are presumed to be dead. Um, he felt that computers held promise. They made it easier to compile lists of sex offenders, develop timelines, cross-check names and incidents, things like that, look around what was happening around the plaza. The old list of car registrations could be examined for the partial license plates. Um, one of the things I would say about cold case teams, and if anybody, Restless Sleep, it's a great book about the New York City Police Department cold case team. They really
Mhm.
do turn over the last stone. It's like they're pushing that Sisyphean rock up the hill. And
Yeah.
he worked with 4 other detectives at the time. Instead of sort of adding more to the files, the team decided to take a different approach. And this is the same thing we saw in 2022 in Delphi. They decided to weed the files instead of adding to them. And they worked to identify every plausible suspect and reinvestigate them enough to either eliminate them or keep them in the file. And that work took 2 years. So we're in 2013. The suspects in the files included a guy named Fred Coffey, who is a South Carolina man and sexual predator. Another one named Arthur Goob, infamous sexual sadist and serial killer James Mitchell. I'm not going to get this right.
He's got a weird, yeah, D Ballard Delibin.
Something
You'll
like
understand. It's a tough word. It's a
and
tough note.
and so all of them had stories with potential links to the Loin girls. So when you're thinking about things like red herrings, there are a lot in any investigation. There are a lot of
Mhm.
people who can meet the profile. It's different to have evidence though, so
Right.
none can be completely eliminated. You know, by 2013, out of the 5 detectives who are on the Loin sisters reinvestigation, only one was left, a detective named Chris Homrock. By the early summer of that year, Chris was ready to give up. He felt really weighed down, but there was one suspect, Ray Molesky, that kind of kept him going. That
Yeah.
he really believed it was him, and that kept him going. And so after the work in 1982, the cold case team took another hard look at Molesky. They reviewed the old witness interviews from after he was arrested for the murder and learned one possible motive for the killings had been to prevent his wife and son from revealing his connection to the Loin case. Because on a bedside table the night of the murders, the police found a slip of paper with Katherine and Sheila's father, John's phone number on it. The more Detective Hemrock looked, the more he found. Several witnesses said Molesky was known to pick up young boys and girls for sex. One witness said he had done it at Wheaton Plaza. Another said they saw 2 little blonde girls in his basement. One woman said Molesky had raped her on 2 different occasions as a teenager, then that he had sex parties in his Maryland home. He's looking pretty good right now. So several men admitted under questioning as boys they had been intimidated by Molesky into sex acts. Detective Homrock also learned that Molesky had been part of a group of men, pedophiles, who shared victims at parties. So
Yeah.
Detective Humrock had what looked like a great fit, a pedophile associated with other sexual predator pedophiles, at the time who swapped victims at parties and pornography at other times. And these people groomed a small group of people together. And so the detective spoke with a couple who owned Molesky's old Maryland home, talked them into letting him rip out the carpet in the basement, look at the concrete floor, nothing. He later learned that Molesky had bought land in Lancaster, Virginia, where my mom grew up. Another connection, it's a rural coastal area. Hemrock spent weeks there, living in a motel, overseeing a dig of the
Yeah,
property.
there it
Nothing.
is. Yeah,
He
nothing. They
wanted,
found nothing.
he wanted to dig up the concrete in Molesky's old basement, took it to a judge. None of the judges were okay with it. So even when you have a lot of, as Allison is alluding to, circumstantial evidence, your gut doesn't count, right?
But you cannot blame Hamrock here for having that hunch as hard as he did. I mean, as you were going through it,
Oh no, I would have gone
absolutely.
at him. I would have gone at him just as hard.
And that is the thing that will again further confound you folks listening right now even more, is that Molesky is the seems like the perfect guy for this. And yet that's not where we land, or well, not where the investigation lands, I'll just say.
Yep.
Um,
So one day, right around the point where Detective Hamrock was feeling particularly discouraged, he's at his desk looking at a bunch of familiar papers. He sees a file he didn't ever remember seeing. It was a 6-page transcript of Lloyd Welch's April 1, 1975 statement to police. He couldn't believe that he had missed it. At the end of the statement, he saw something that really caught his attention. Welch had told the interviewers that he'd seen a man who led the girls from the mall who walked with a limp. And by the way,
like,
this is another Molesky connection,
mm-hmm.
walked with a limp. So the detective thought they had hit the lottery and that it must have been Molesky. It described the limp that he had. But another detective, Dave Davis, who Detective Hamrock showed the statement, thought it was odd that a witness who is a teenager like Welch would recall the girls with that level of detail, because most teenagers, as you can imagine, wouldn't look twice at 2 young girls. Still, he flunked the polygraph. That didn't bother the detectives that much at the time. They put little stock in the machine. And we talked a little bit about polygraphs, but they found a 1977 photo of an arrest that Detective Hemrock found. And they realized that it looked like a lot like the alternative sketch.
Yep, there he is. And again, this is shades of Delphi a little bit here with the 2 sketches, and how although Delphi is a little different because you could almost say that Richard Allen kinda looks kinda like a weird amalgamation of both the sketches that were in that case. But this pretty definitive in a lot of ways, you know? And again, I want to bring it back and remind people when in teasing this episode, I was talking about like how the miracle piece of paper kind of broke this case wide open. Chris talks about how that paper was just sitting there on the pile when he came back from the restroom. It was just there. He just looks down and he sees it. It's almost just like uh, the fresh eyes, you know, just something
So,
popped out finally.
and I think an important thing is, like, they're looking at him right now as a witness, but like half in the back of the mind of one detective is like, huh, this is a
Yeah.
little weird, right? Like, I don't have any evidence, much less evidence than you do on Molesky, but this is a little weird. He's a potential witness.
Hmm.
So the detectives start looking at him, look for links between Molesky and Welch. Welch didn't really fit the profile of a child kidnapper, but there were 3 instances of child sexual abuse on his record, each daughters of girlfriends, and each time in their homes. So a little bit different than what happened in an abduction. It was bad, but far cry from kidnapping 2 unknown girls and potentially murdering them. So maybe they thought Welch was just a straight up witness who also happened to be a pedophile. And that's why he noticed the girls. And maybe also an alternative was that he and Molesky were working together.
And that's
Um,
totally feasible, and remember, the witnesses had seen, um, uh, Lloyd leering at these girls. I mean, there is witness testimony to that, that he was staring intently at them.
yeah. And so what I want to do is just jump ahead a little bit. So when
Mhm.
Lloyd's stepmother, because I think we're probably going to wrap in the next few minutes and come back
Yeah.
tomorrow. We'll be back tomorrow to finish this. So when
Yes.
Lloyd's stepmother, Edna Welch, who lived with him in 1975 at the 4714 Baltimore Avenue address, was called before a grand jury in Bedford County, Virginia, she said she knew nothing about the Loin sister, uh, but from a letter recovered in a search of
Mm.
Edna's home, it suggests that there was more to the story. She told police, "You're wasting your time." But Edna wrote letters back and forth with Lloyd while he was in prison in Delaware. We'll get to why he was in prison in Delaware. And in them, according to a Washington Post report, Lloyd told Edna that he had completed two alternative to violence programs. In 2004, got his high school GED. In one 2008 letter, according to the Post, he reflected on his life and said, "I did a lot of bad things in my life, and I guess I'm paying for it." In other letters, he wrote about his hope of getting out early, his relationship with God. Eventually, investigators end up at Edna's Welch's house in this rural patch of East Tennessee. The investigator said this 81-year-old stepmother at the time initially tried to create an alibi for Lloyd, saying she remembered that he went to Wheaton Plaza a week after the girl's disappearance because he had watched a news report about the case and was trying to get reward money. But investigators said in affidavits that were later filed in court that Lloyd admitted to them that he had concocted that whole story and put his stepmother up to telling it to remove suspicion that he was involved in Sheila and Katherine's disappearances. Edna denied lying in the interview with the Post, but she did admit that when she was visited by Montgomery County detectives, she fired off a letter to Lloyd saying that if he had done what the police were alleging, he should stay in prison. And he wrote back telling her that he couldn't hurt anyone like that and added, "I can't believe you would think that." Edna later suggested that the investigators talked to Lloyd's younger half brother, Roy, who told them, quote, "I know he's incarcerated. He's in Delaware for something to do with little kids." This is a first moment where they realize, this Delaware incarceration. So at this point, they didn't know he was in Delaware. He's incarcerated for serious time for something with kids. And those words really jumped in the detectives' heads
Mhm.
and they began to cast a wider net. And this led detectives to finding Lloyd in the Delaware prison. And here's a state by state sampling of what else they found. In Maryland, he was charged with larceny in 1977, burglary in 1981, assault and battery in 1982. In Virginia, he had been charged with sexual assault on a minor in Manassas in 1996 and simple assault in 1997, same town where the girls were believed to have been seen in 1975 in the car. In Florida, he was charged with burglary in Orlando in 1977, burglary in Miami in 1980. In South Carolina, he was charged with public drunkenness and grand larceny in Myrtle Beach, burglary in Horry County, sexual assault of a 10-year-old girl in Lockhart, and in 1992, drunk driving in Clover. Finally, he lands in Delaware. And this is just, please note, this is just what they found out at this time. There's more to come.
Yeah.
Finally, he lands hard in Delaware, where he's charged with sexual assault of a 10-year-old girl in Newcastle. Um, you know, it's quite a record. It's
Very.
quite an amazing record that he has. And the FBI's VICAP unit helped the squad build a timeline for Lloyd Welch, cross-checking his travel across the country. BAU and VICAP do amazing jobs supporting investigations like this. They found a number of hints, and one was strikingly similar to the Loin sisters case. Welsh had worked as a carnival worker, and I guess this would be a great spot to stop and pick it up tomorrow.
Yeah, yeah, Carney. And I mean, we just have all
The
the
story
sort
had
of,
Connie's.
the stereotypes are just really hitting us hard in this episode, uh but it was just amazing, like, oh, another level to this. And the ride continues to have a lot more twists and turns from here. We are not nearly through it. So we will wrap it up for this episode. Come back and we will record live again tomorrow. Of course, both episodes will be up
You would do 8
and the
p.m.
podcast
Eastern?
feed soon. Yes,
8
8
p.m.
PM
Eastern?
Eastern.
Okay.
Yeah. And, I'll go ahead and just, rattle off my outro, and then we'll get out of here. So,
Okay.
and we will pick back up with what happened when Lloyd Welch went from witness to suspect in the disappearance of the Lyon sisters. And it gets considerably more disturbing from here and more than a little perplexing. And Jason and I will be presenting our theories at the end as well, and look forward to hearing what you think about this one too. If you're watching this on YouTube, we thank you so much for joining us. Feel free to email me at vintagevillainsPod@gmail.com or over on Instagram. You can also swing on over to the Facebook group, the Vintage Villains Soiree, and say hello. We're always happy to see new faces and discuss any of the cases covered on this show or any you'd like to see covered. And special thanks to all the Patreon members who get access to these live recordings as a thanks for their support. It's only a few bucks a month, but it helps more than you realize. And all the necessary links to that will be in the show notes. And so, meanwhile, my friends, go forth and make good history. And I'll see you next time in another century.
See you guys soon. I'll do my outro on the top of the next episode or do it in a separate file. All right,
Okay.
guys. Thanks for
Awesome.
joining us.
Yeah.
It gets interesting tomorrow. It's really,
It,
if you think it's interesting now, it's really good.
yeah. Yeah. You guys, I can't wait to talk. And yeah, I guess we got to go over to the prosecutor.